Robservations with Meyer Burnett.
Let's see. This one comes from Colin. This is actually a really interesting question. Colin says, "Hi Rob, today I'd like to talk to you about editing. Back 21 years ago in 2000, I learned the basics of using Adobe Premiere. Later, when I got a job at a local TV station as a graphic artist, I was interested to see that the reporters all cut their stories in physical edit bays. Back then, it would have taken too much time to digitize their footage, use the software, render, and dump it all back to beta tape. The reporters had 2 machines in a small room where they would construct their stories in analog fashion. Many of them had done this thousands of times, so they were quite quick and efficient at the task. So here's my question. Tell us about how editing has evolved in the last 3 decades from your perspective. What kind of specialized hardware has existed? What's made life easier? Any big breakthroughs that really shook things up? What do you use at home now and why? What's the difference today between a dedicated home office edit bay and an edit setup at a local studio? Has the philosophy behind editing gone through major shifts in that time? Thanks and all the best, Colin." Wow, dude. Let me take some of my sommelier. I'm being my own sommelier today. The official sommelier of the channel is, of course, Julius Goodwin. And by the way, thank you, Julius. We got Drea Di Matteo's wine the other day, which maybe we'll drink on Whining About Movies, which we haven't cracked open yet, but that's thanks to Julius Goodwin. Thank you, sir. That is a very interesting question. So I was interested in film editing my whole life. I remember one of the things that really I started to notice editing, and I read about editing. I didn't quite understand a lot of editing. I mean, I was always aware I was watching it, but I didn't understand. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really understand there was a science behind it. I didn't get it. I didn't know what it was. And I think one of the first times that I ever noticed editing to the point where I was enamored of it was in 1979 when I saw All That Jazz. And Alan Hyme, who edited that film, there's actually an editor, there's a scene in an edit bay in All That Jazz where Roy Scheider's character is working on a movie called The Stand-Up, and he's cutting a comedy sequence, a stand-up comedy sequence, and they go through it many, many times. And Alan Hyme, who edited All That Jazz, it's such a self-reflexive movie, but All That Jazz really made me sit up and notice editing because of the way it works in terms of, especially in that film, you have a very straightforward story, but at the same time you're zipping in and out of these fantasy sequences, you're jumping back and forth through time. It was just something that I was blown away by when I saw the film in the theater. So, and at the time, my experience of editing was I grew up with, I had a Super 8 camera, and I made a few movies with my action figures and kids in the neighborhood like people do. And I had a little editing setup where I'm literally, if you've ever done it, I mean, you've got your film, you literally would splice, you'd cut the film with a blade. It was a tool, but it was basically a razor blade, and you had the cutting tool, and then you would literally tape, little celluloid tape, whatever, and you tape the 2 pieces of Super 8 film together where you made the edit, and you do that. So to me, the act of editing was very linear, which meant like you could work on any part of the movie that you wanted to, but it was like, okay, I'm going to finish this movie. You have to do one cut after the next, and you start from the beginning of the scene, and you move through the scene as you're making your edits. And that's how it was very linear, beginning to end. That was how I thought of editorial. Now, you could have other people, or you could work on various scenes in your movie, but you always started your movie scenes from beginning to end because the physical nature of it was you didn't want to have to go back and move things around or take apart your cuts or anything like that. So it was all very physical. It was very tactile. And so when I was editing, that's how I thought about it. And I edited from the time I was a kid. I did video editing, linking up two VCRs together in the crude way with pausing and things like that. You would make sort of video mixtapes or whatever, and sometimes I made videos of myself or my friends or whatever, and you're editing tape to tape. But when you're editing tape to tape, it was still linear. You're still moving linearly from beginning to end. And that was kind of the way editing always worked. And the first movie that I ever edited, I've talked about this before, was Full Moon's Arcade, and we did that with Peter Billingsley. Now, since Arcade was going to be finished on tape, it was going to be released, we'd finish it on Digibeta, and then we would master it on Digibeta. And so when we were recutting the movie, it was all transferred to tape, and we were given the tapes, and we actually edited the movie on 3/4-inch tape. And we were making an EDL, so that would all of our edits would be, an EDL is an edit decision list. So when we were putting everything together, you would have a time code in and out point. So say whatever the time code number was, the time code is sort of an imprinted, for those of you who don't know about this, time code is a numerical system that allows you to edit. So you can always go back and you use the numbers to find where your cuts are. Like 3 minutes or 1 hour, 3 minutes and 1 hour, 3 minutes, 48 seconds and 22 frames could be your out point. And then you have your in point would be another part of the tape or a different tape or whatever. So it was very linear. So when we were cutting Arcade, because of the fact that we're finishing on tape, we also had to build it linearly. So my first experience professionally recutting a whole movie, because we were starting from scratch with Arcade, it was a very linear experience. This was in 1993, and I was it was, if we didn't like an edit, we wanted to fix something, we'd go back. You'd have to then recreate with your EDL. It would give you all the cuts, and you'd have to go back to the point where you didn't like it and then lay down the same shots or make your changes. I mean, it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare, and it took forever. And cutting linearly was pretty much par for the course. In 1995, I worked at an ad agency, which I've talked about, Jacobs and Gerber, and they bought an Avid. Now, an Avid is an editing system. A bunch of editors got together using computer technology, and they made an editing system. It came out of, there was a digital editing system, Edit Droid, that Lucasfilm had developed that was older. But Avid was the first computer software system that I used to edit. And I started in 1995 at Jacobs & Gerber when they bought themselves an Avid system. Now, Avid was making their own hardware, and it was software as well. It was mostly software. But how an Avid worked was you would transfer your footage. You'd have your either film footage that you would have transferred onto tape, various ways to do that, and then, or you would have digital files, but most people don't have or didn't have digital files at the time. You still would transfer your footage to tape, and then what you would do is once it was on tape, you would intake that, you would ingest the material into the computer to manipulate. Now, for a movie, this is how it used to go. So for a movie, you would have 3 different pieces of numerical data that were part of when you're intaking into the Avid that you needed. First of all, you needed the key code numbers. And the key numbers are numbers that are on each side, or on the side of the film, that every single frame has a number. And you'd have that number. Then you would have the video time code number that was on the tape that they'd put the footage on. And then there was the audio time code, because when you're recording audio for a movie, you need to know where that is, where the numbers are, and like if someone says hello, how are you, that might be at hour number 18, minute 38, second 10, frame whatever, and all you'd have to have those 3 numbered systems had to be part of your files. So you'd get an additional thing called flex files from the telecine house, the people that were putting your film on tape. So you get a tape, usually it was a 3/4 inch tape back in 95, and then you would get a little floppy disk with all of this information on it. So you would put the floppy disk in, get all the information, and then you would what's called batch digitize. All that information would then be taken off the tape, and then once you had all that in the computer, you could start editing material. Now, this was revolutionary because normally to edit, say, a feature film, you would need a group of people because you need somebody syncing up. I mean, literally physically taking the film and taking the sound and syncing it up physically. Well, what digital editing allowed you to do was someone else had already done that, so you literally had the picture and sound in front of you, and one person, like myself, I didn't need to work with an assistant editor or anything. One person could sit down and edit a movie. This is, again, 1995. Now, this was, I can't begin to tell you how revolutionary that was. And the thing that was even more revolutionary is that the way I started to think about how I could edit a feature film completely changed. Because normally I was thinking of editing linearly from the beginning, and then you'd move through a scene to the end. Well, now you didn't have to do that. When you're on a computer, you're at the speed of thought. You could be working halfway through a scene and be like, oh, 20 minutes ago in the film, a character had a similar facial expression. Maybe there's a way to tie the two. You could literally jump back instantaneously 20 minutes before and look at the scene, look at the performance, match them up and make, I don't know, if you were trying to draw a line between one and the other, you could do that. But the fact was, movies now were no longer a proposition where you necessarily had to work from beginning to the end. You could do it any way you wanted. You could go backwards. You could start from the end of the scene and work your way back. Didn't matter. Looking at all the different dailies was much easier to do. So the whole art form of editorial, I cannot tell you how monumentally and forever changed it was because of these non-linear editing systems, whether it was Adobe Premiere, whether it was Apple, whether it was iMovie, whether it was Final Cut, Avid, whatever system you're using, now DaVinci, whatever you're using to edit on, non-linear editing completely changed the game. The way you'd think about editing was irrevocably changed forever. And the fact that I was able to, in the mid-90s, I was editing, I left Jacobs and Gerber and I went off on my own, and I became a freelance editor. And I was specializing in editing movies, first-time directors' films, which I did for about 5 years. And it was an amazing experience, and it changed my entire life. It changed the way I looked at editing. And if any of you have ever read Neil Stephenson's novel Snow Crash is basically, it's about a lot of different things, but there's basically a language, let's call it a language virus, but information that literally rewires your brain. And the way non-linear editing, being able to edit on computer editing systems, completely changed the way I thought about editorial. It was a whole new paradigm. And thinking about how a movie no longer, you can jump in and out of any point of the movie you want. If you're working on the first 10 minutes of the movie and you remembered something at hour or minute 50 that you want to change, because you could just do it instantaneously. You could jump around, and it made your mind expand and think about the different possibilities of sequences. You could try things that you might not have tried when you were cutting, when you literally were physically putting pieces of film together, because why would you want to bother? And nonlinear editing digital editing allowed you to do whatever you wanted. And if you wanted to take something apart and try something new, you could do that. All that matters was how much time did you have. That was another thing. Because there were so many choices and possibilities, sometimes it stymied people because they didn't have to make a decision. You still have to make a decision when you're editing, but there's so many ways to do things now that a lot of the time it would make you think, and then people started to second guess themselves, and you'd do like 10 cuts of a scene and you realize I didn't like any of it, and where are we and what's going to happen. So that was the big thing for me. And it allowed me as one man to become my own editing team. I was an editor and post-production supervisor for a long time, and I served that same function on Tango Shalom, which, remind you, you can get now starting tomorrow. You can see Tango Shalom in the greater San Diego area if you go to the San Diego International Jewish Film Festival, and in just a couple of days in Charlotte, North Carolina. If you live in and around Charlotte, North Carolina, you can actually see my latest editorial work on, well, my latest nominated editorial work, one of 3 finalists at the Anatolia Film Festival in Turkey. That was a big honor. But you can see my editorial stylings on Tango Shalom. A lot of different kinds of editorial was required in that movie. But it was definitely a game changer, a life-changing event, was working on these nonlinear systems. Avid was pretty much the go-to system for cutting movies because it was really designed as a platform around editing feature films. And then, of course, with the advent, Apple wanted to get in on the game, so they made Final Cut, which I also used. So for the TV show that I'm working on, with the show for Netflix, that was a Adobe Premiere job. But for the most part, those are the 3 pieces of software I still use: Avid, Adobe Premiere, and Final Cut, and also DaVinci. DaVinci is a color timing, you color grading software. It's fantastic, but they've also got they're making it you can edit in DaVinci, and DaVinci is pretty much, it's an industry standard. So when you do a project and you're taking it to a colorist, they're using it in DaVinci. Now, before, when I started back in 95, 96, all of the Avid equipment was very expensive. You'd rent edit bays. They were expensive because to get a tricked out Avid with all the stuff you needed could be $100,000. And I used to go to there was a place I used to work out of at Raleigh where I cut many movies there, and I really like working there. And they got out of the business because everyone, as prices fell and the software became accessible to everyone, you stopped going to expensive edit bays. Now, some companies still have edit bays because the studios prefer to work that way, whether it's a security issue or whatever. But now everybody's got their own rig. You ask the question, what's the difference? There is no difference. You can edit. I edited, for instance, I edited all of the Star Trek The Next Generation documentaries and the Star Trek Enterprise documentaries that I worked on for Blu-ray. I edited them all on my laptop. Everything I did on my laptop, I went right out of my laptop and took them to CBS. And what was done on my laptop, it was a nice Macintosh 17-inch PowerBook with an external monitor, but still, the external drives and my laptop is what I cut 3 years of documentaries on. So it doesn't matter anymore. It has been all this software. It's been completely democratized. Anybody can get it. Anybody can work on it. That doesn't mean anybody's talented. You still have to know how to edit. But from now on, I think the 3 or the 4, it's Avid, Final Cut, Premiere, or DaVinci. Those would be the software that I use the most. Whatever. It depends if I have a client, it depends what the client wants. But mostly, for me now, it's about how do you interface with the rest of the departments? How can I most easily interface with the audio department, the color department, the VFX department? What is the easiest workflow that we have that we can all work together? So I hope that answers your question. But that's the thing. I mean, non-linear editing systems, computer-based editing systems, changed the way I thought about movies, changed the way I thought about editorial, and certainly changed the way I worked. I can't even begin to tell you what kind of a leap ahead, a leap forward that was in what it means to edit a film. It was incredible.